Hi, this is Greg. This is the first of several videos that will go over some customization options that you can do in Scantheus, and they are found over here on the right side in the admin expander. And for this video, we're just going to go into general options. We're going to open this up here. Now, there's a option here called dual monitor mode. Now, what that does is it creates two windows for Scantheus instead of one. And when you're in that mode, instead of this main image window here toggling between scanned image and the live view image, it just becomes the live view in the main window, and in this window, it is your scanned image. So as I click here, you see I'm moving into the different images. So now in here, I can go and modify. I'm going to do a crop here. I'm going to undo the crop. If I do a right click, I have the options that I would normally have when I was looking at a scanned window over here. Let me make this a little smaller so you can toggle it like that. Close this down. So imagine this in one monitor and this on your main monitor. So now you have two views, one of the scanned image and one of the live view image. Now when I do a scan, what it'll do is this image will show the last scanned image unless you go and you select another one. Now this also has a mode where you can look at two pages. So now when I click on it, it shows the first page is the one I click on, and the second page is the one, the next page after the one I clicked on. So you can do a thing here. I'm going to delete this image. So now I went from 24 to 23 pages. And this is the same as you would normally do in a live view. If I turn it off, that window goes away, and this window toggles back to being a window that toggles between live view and the scanned image. So that's dual monitor mode. This show tooltips, it's on by default. Tooltips are the little text see that pops up there to describe each setting. And I tried to put it throughout the application on every setting to describe what's going on. If that becomes irritating to you, again, personal preference, I like it myself, even though maybe it gets a little in the way at times, but it's helpful to remind me on some of the more obscure settings what they do, but you can turn that off and you notice it won't show the tooltips anymore. In cases where you have some documents that you can't use a glass, like you don't want to, they're delicate, you don't want to press down on it, you can turn the show no glass options on. And what that does is under the cameras expander, it shows the no glass options. And you see by default that is not shown since you're typically scanning with glass for most projects. Scanning with glass is by far the best quality you can get if you can, because it flattens out the images for you. It flattens out the pages of the book for you. But in cases where you can't do it, we're going to turn on the no glass options here. And there's three that you can turn on. Curvature correction is okay. So now you're scanning without a glass, so your book's not getting pressed down. I don't know why I didn't spread this out for you earlier, but this will automatically via software flatten out the image. This perspective correction is a similar type thing where you're using the little mini V cradle. If you don't want to open up the book all the way, it's a little V cradle that you can scan, and it will flatten out the pages will now be kind of left and right with some kind of perspective, but this will flatten out the perspective. Now I can kind of show it here. We're going to go the opposite way where we have a really nice flat image here, nice horizontal image. Now what this does is when you turn it on, it creates this line here in the middle, and what you want to do is adjust your book so that that line is right down the middle of the gutter of the book. So I'm going to do a scan here, and what you'll see, it will distort it in the opposite direction. So I have a nice horizontal book, and now it distorts it so that the pages are angled. So what you'd normally do is you'd be scanning a book where the pages are angled because of the V, and this would flatten them out so that they look like this, like a nice flat book. Finger masking is self-explanatory. If you're having to hold the pages down, again, you don't have glass, so you may have to be holding pages down that are curling up or something. This will has an algorithm that after the scan, it will go and look around the edge of the document and attempt to remove any fingers that are detected within that area. This allow multiple default configurations has to do with saving your config here. Now, by default, you only have one default. So whenever you say save as default, it will save the default configuration to a default name named default. And you don't have to worry about selecting a name, not like opening up a config and saying I want this config or that config. Just by default, you have a single file. So what default config does is instead of using some kind of internal values that may not be applicable to your typical setup, it will use the default whenever you do a new. So all the settings, including the book name and everything, you still have to change that. But whenever you do a new, it loads that default config up. Now, suppose you may want multiple defaults in a situation. Let's say I've got I want to have a default config that's for no glass options. So I want to be able to toggle between the two, and whenever I do a new config, I want to be able to select that. So first I'm going to, let's turn this on so it will allow a new default. I'm going to save that as a default. So it looks like I already have a secondary default out there. I'm going to save that as a default. Always ask if you want to override it. And then I'm going to turn on no class options. And then I'm going to do a save as default. Now in this case, I can give it another name. So it doesn't just save it, it prompts you for a unique name for that default. So should put a descriptive name in there so that when you do a new config, it'll give this selection and you can pick which one you want. So that's my no glass options config, default config. So now I'm going to do a new. I'm going to get my standard default config. Now remember, my standard one does not have no glass options turned on. So now it loaded. Now it's not just these settings, it loads all the settings. That's the only change I made between the two configs. Now if I do another new config, I can go here and say no glass and it'll have that setting. So like if I with the no glass options one, if I went in here and let's say I had a curvature correction turned on, it would save that as well. I'm going to save that as a default, and I want to put that in my no glass one. So now I've modified my no glass option, my no glass config, default config, and override it. So let's go back to my normal default. Click on that. You notice it doesn't even have the no glass options at all, because my default config is for using glass. Now, if I go in here, I have a material that I want to use no glass. I do that. My no glass options come on. It has whatever settings. And it also affects, if you've got a different detect option here, the view area, everything. So that's what the multiple default configuration. So unless you have some unique situation where you want multiple defaults, I would keep this turned off. It's just a simpler process. So whenever you do a new config, you just get one default. There's no confusion there. So you can go in here and I can delete different defaults. And I have multiples here. So now without multiple defaults, whenever I do a new, I'm not prompted, it just loads up the default config. Font size is the size of the text for all the main window here. Now, the easiest way to change this, you can actually enter the number, but really the best way is using your scroll wheel on your mouse. So I'm going to push my scroll wheel up, and you'll see as I do that, it changes. As long as my cursor is within this field, it'll increase up. You can go all the way up to 24. Now, notice what happens. It may help you read this text, but you lose real estate for the image. So keep that in mind. You want to balance out being able to read the text to working with the image. The design of Scantheus was to maximize the amount of space for this main image area here. And primarily, the only text open would be along the left side here as you're doing your production scanning. That's why these are tucked away over here to kind of get them out of the way, because they're not typically digging around inside there. This background color is the background color of the app. It puts a little, there's a gradient there. By default, it's this, it's from a light blue to a dark blue, affects the buttons and the thumbnail background. That's kind of a personal preference thing. So if you have a favorite color, but you're not the only operator on the scanner, you might have a little discussion with your fellow operators about what a good color is there. And then finally, the document dimensions. In North America, we typically use inches, but if you want to use millimeters, that's fine. This affects the display of anything where it's showing a dimension of an image. Like if you look at the bottom right and bottom left here, bottom left shows the size of the rectangle area, and the bottom right shows the capture area, the whole window there. See, it's in inches. If I switch here to millimeters and put the cursor over the image, you can see it shows millimeters instead of inches. It'll always show pixels, but you can toggle between inches and millimeters. And that's it for general options under the admin expander.